Hi, this is Sindari, and I am with the Kingdom of the Desert Winds here with
Jazzel Darkwolf, and I'm with IMD.
And we're here to talk about how to judge Garb. And I want to make sure that we understand that while this is a how to help judges learn how to judge Garb, it is also available to help entrants learn what to look for and what to do and not do to help their piece. And today we're going to be discussing specifically the complexity piece of judgment. When we are judging overall, we judge aesthetic, we judge complexity, and then we judge skill of execution. Right now we're going to be talking about complexity of a piece.
Okay, well, we're going to start with seams. Seams are the basic. If you have a plain T-tunic, it can be as simple as just sewing the two corners on the under the arms, so right here, and cutting out a neckline and saying that you're done. That would be a basic T-tunic. However, it would not score very well. But as a judge, we're trying to give people a 3.0. 3.0 is your basic C grade. If you watched video number 1 on aesthetics and what court garb versus field garb are, then it would be that video we talked about that. So this is the tunic that we used during that video, and this is my idea of a great example of a basic C grade or a 3.0 tunic. It is a basic plain tunic, no embroidery. It has a little embellishment here, which is going to make up for the fact that the seam, which is really what I want to start talking about, is a single seam. There's two pieces of fabric sewn together with a single stitch in the center. This, while is serviceable and it will hold together, is not a great seam. With this kind of seam, it will ravel and it will pull. You will be replacing, especially here under the arm. You can see that it's pulled. That is where anybody who wears fighting tunics very often will rip a seam. Even court garb right here will rip, and it will rip from here straight across. Depending on the fighting, it might even go further, especially if a sword gets stuck in it, and then it will rip across. So even in court garb, this is one of those elements that you want to look for and say no to. For things that are going to be washed on a regular basis, it needs more stitching there. Now this fabric has that same basic one element stitch. It has no binding on the edges, but because this is a different fabric, this is a polar fleece or a felt wool, they never ravel. So this single stitch, while still not great, even on this, is serviceable. It will never ravel. The stitch may pull out, and there's no second stitching there to help it hold its place.
And I think I want to emphasize that when we're talking specifically about seams, what you're looking for is what type of fabric will unravel.
So this is a serviceable edge. It's not going to go, it's better than this one because I would score this one higher. This would be a 3.0. This one only got a 3.0 because it has embellishments on the edges. But this one gets a 3.0 because this one isn't going anywhere. This has a cute little blanket stitch on the edge for embellishment also. So it's in the same element as this other one. But this one is not ever going to fray. So that's why this with a single stitch is better than this one with a single stitch. The next step up would be there's something called pinking shears. They have the little things that looks like saw teeth on the edge. And you could just do that single stitch and then take the fabric and use these pinking shears, and it will keep it from fraying. That could be done to this tunic, and that would up the value of this tunic already. This one has the next step up to this one, which is serged. Now, serge, you do not have to have a serger to do a serge stitch. Most sewing machines have what it looks like a straight stitch with a zigzag included. That is called a serger stitch, and that does the same thing as these fancy sewing machine sergers will do. So you have your single stitch right here, or on a serger, some sergers come with that where you can have a safety stitch. So serger machines come with 3, 4, 5 needles. On a 3 needle, it will not do this safety stitch. On a 4 needle machine, if you have all 4 needles threaded, it will do this safety stitch for you. So you only have to do it one time. However, it will sew both pieces of fabric together, which I tend to like better, except for in certain pieces where you want it to lay flat. In a tunic, having both pieces together doesn't matter at all. In a corseted top or a fitted piece, where it's very tight fitting, you wouldn't want that much fabric there. You would want to lay it flat. And then I like to see them both sewn down, because you'll see this one is already coming up and bunching together, and under the arms and at collars, that's very uncomfortable for the wearer. So while this is a perfectly serviceable stitch, the job is done, the edges are finished, that is a good stitch. This is not quite as good, this is better. So whereas this is a 3-0, this is a 3-5, just because those edges are finished. Now the next element is this one, where it's called a flat felt. This is when the fabrics are slightly higher than the other. One is folded over, and then folded over again, and then stitched down. Now it's flat, it doesn't annoy anybody, and the stitches are nicely down as to not bother anybody who's wearing it. This is wonderful, particularly under arms, where it rubs all the time. Now because it's so well done, the fabric will give out before these beautiful stitches will. The next would be a French seam. A French seam is when the fabric is turned with the reverse. This is beautiful because it has such nice definition. This is the back side of the fabric and this is the front. So you put the fronts together and sew. So the stitch is on the outside. That would be completely inappropriate if you were doing it with a single stitch. However, in a French seam, it is then folded over and stitched again. So it comes up with this stitch. Now both edges are down and solid.
The raw edges are encased.
So they will never come undone. This is beautiful, especially in delicate fabrics such as silk, satin, and this velvet, because they do ravel really quickly. You don't even have to wash it before it will start to ravel.
Very fine, like chiffons, very fine fabrics that.
And any well-made piece, if you go to the grocery, you go to the store, if you go to Walmart and look at the stitching, you'll see this. If you go to Marc Jacobs or one of the high-end clothing stores, you will never see anything less than this. So in a French seam, in that one, she did not sew it down. This is I call this flatting it, because you push it to one side and take another stitch. Now on satin, you wouldn't, satin is fine, but on velvet, you wouldn't want that second stitch, or on, what's the animal fabric, animals where they look like fur, you wouldn't want to do the second stitch because it gets stuck in there. But every other fabric on the planet does better with this stitch because it's been encased and now pushed down to the side. It doesn't irritate anybody, and because there's a bunch of fabric in there, it will never pull out. Whereas in a felted seam where one is longer than the other and turned over, the one that is shorter could in fact pull out at some point. This one can't ever do that. This seam will last longer than the fabric itself. So in seams, those are the different ones you're looking for. So this is your low grade, this is your mid grade, and these are your high grade stitches. This is what you want to be looking for. Without these, it cannot get past a certain level of grading. It doesn't matter how beautiful the embellishments are, it doesn't matter how great the fabrics are, and how many layers they've chosen to use. If the stitching is bad, it can't get past a certain level. So this is a basic tea tunic. There are no set-in sleeves. A set-in sleeve is where it has an arm's eye. This means it's been cut and placed in. With this cut, it's on a slant. They use a French curve to create this. If you use a pattern, it actually comes this way. But this can be created by yourself if you just take something that looks like a big U, and you take that U, and that's what is a French curve, and that's where this is created. This changed the fit of clothing when these became into fashion. So when this is cut out, that gives the sleeve more ability to sit down still. Whereas, and you'll notice when this one lays down, it bunches. So it's something like that. If you want to do a basic tea tunic, which is perfectly acceptable to do a tea tunic, however, if you want to have it so it's more usable for a longer period of time, you take a shaped fabric like this in a little triangle shape, and it sets in the small side sets in, and it could be a full triangle, or in this, you know, the shape where this one side's shorter than the other, into a diamond shape, and you set it right here into the sleeve. You doing that adds fabric, and so when people do this motion, or this motion, or this motion, it doesn't rip. So while this is okay, perfectly acceptable. However, a gusset or a set-in sleeve makes it more usable, longer lasting, and so therefore ups the complexity of a piece.
We talked a little bit about the difference in a round neckline versus a keyhole. Necklines are different types of neckline.
They are all perfectly acceptable necklines. Either one are beautiful necklines. In court garb, I don't see that you need to sew down the inset of the neckline. However, in fighting garb, I believe you do. Because in the sewing and in the jumping around and in all that they do, with that rubbing up against, it gets to be very irritating. In court garb, doesn't matter as much. That's another element of difference. Again, the sturdiness factor. This is more delicate, it doesn't need it, and if you want the aesthetics not to have a stitch coming here, you wouldn't want to sew that down. However, it can be beautiful if you'll do a fancier stitch right here. It adds to the complexity of the piece and makes it even more beautiful, and it holds down this piece here so that it stays put. Now this is a normal keyhole, where it literally is, you have a slightly scooped neckline, and then you just slide it down to where it can fit over the head. It can be as short as this, long here, or even as long as here if you want it to be that open chest effect. And now a mandarin collar is a stand-up collar. It is a little band that goes around the neck, and if you have a mandarin collar, that means it must be open down the front, because you have to be able to get into it. So a mandarin collar has to have some way to adjust. And mandarin collars are always tight around the throat, and then they come down and are usually open with some kind of clasp lower in.
Or the turn down collar, again
the turn down collar, a turn down collar. I have one here. This has a peaked edge. These can be in any form. You can have a Peter Pan, which is a scallop. You can have this. You can have literally a full scallop that goes around. It doesn't matter. They're all just collars. So this is a collared shirt. If it was standing and short, it would be a mandarin. With it laying down, it is a collar, adding to the complexity of the piece, and can be very difficult to do, so it really does add to the complexity. But most standard tunics, especially in fighting tunics, you won't see this. Court garb, you'll see this a lot more, and you should look for it. It should be more expected in court garb, especially in men's shirts, because that's expected. Women's shirts, they occasionally have it if they want to dress like men, but on the whole, they have scallop necklines with more embellishment here. But on the keyhole, and then there is a scooped neck. This is with elastic, and women love these because they can then hang over the shoulder or up on the shoulder, but it's very popular to have it lower on the shoulder and then wear a corset piece over the top. This is a beautiful piece. It has multiple layers. It has the same bias tape on the inside, pulled over, and that's where it slides through, and that same technique is used here and here and here, giving it, again, more complexity, more elements to have been added to this piece, therefore adding to the complexity. Even though it's a basic broadcloth, could have been used for a tunic at any point, has more elements.
I think it was a sheet, actually.
Yeah, and I've used bed sheets, I've used tablecloths, I've used curtains, really love curtains, especially in delicate pieces on under sheets. Under dresses where they don't show only but little elements. It keeps it from having too much weight and too thick, because in modern society we don't want to have that much. We have indoor air conditioning and we have indoor heating, so we don't need the thickness of layers like they did in the past. However, a nice cotton underdress, you can't beat it because it soaks up moisture in summer months, so it is really nice. So if you see a basic fabric like this, it should be marked down if it's in court garb, especially if it's in an underdress, because they're actually being more period by doing it in this fabric. The fancier fabrics look gorgeous and they should not be marked down because they chose to use it, but it's a different element of design. This is actually more period. The fancier stuff is much more easy to wear because it is lighter and thinner, especially in events that are outside. So those should never be marked down because of it. You should look at the overall piece and see how it all works together. A piece like this by itself really should never be given. If it's considered court garb, it needs the whole thing. You need to see all the pieces. This would normally have a skirt and a corset over the top of it, and it should be given as one piece, and that should be suggested to entrance, or as the entrant, you should know better. Slap your hand if you don't. Hems. Okay, so none of these are really going to be worried about hems. In fighting tunics, the standard is to use bias tape or to just roll it over. Now this has been rolled twice. If you had serged the edge like this one, you don't need to roll it over twice. However, aesthetically, it still looks better if you roll it over one more time. But because of the delicacy of this fabric, she only rolled it once because this prevents it from having that crinkly effect after being washed. However, if this is silk and brocade, it should be dry cleaned. It should not be washed. Another element, so if you're thinking about letting people wear the items before they're turned in, make sure that you have it dry cleaned or washed first. I cannot emphasize, that's my biggest pet peeve, is to have items turned in dirty or
very
ripped.
odor filled.
Again, I consider that dirty.
Yeah.
The odor, really,
No bueno,
I
no
have
bueno.
marked pieces really down for being turned in nasty. Because I don't want to touch it, nor do I want to smell it, and I have to turn that fabric in and I have to touch it. It is unkind to the judges to turn it in dirty. So for hems, this is a much bigger deal. On these, bias tape, rolled hems, that's all fairly standard for these. You will rarely see a true hem in a fighting class of tunics or dresses. They do have the fighting dresses, but again, the heavy weight of the fabric makes it so using a hem is impractical. But in a dress, this is a blind hem stitch. So this is where they turn the fabric under, and she, obviously when the pattern was close to her height, so she only rolled it under a little bit. I suggest having at least 3 inches in a hem because it gives better weight to the dress and helps it to hang better. But again, that's an aesthetic thing. That's not a quality for changing the score.